Hello, cosmic beings out there. I'm Mana, a therapeutic astrologer and interviewer. I'm passionate about learning and sharing insights on how to live a better life. I hope you'll stick around as I infiltrate the minds of thought leaders, authors, and healers from around the globe. Wherever you find yourself right now, dear listener, I want you to remember that you have a place to call whole. Now, please enjoy this episode. Yeah, so here we are in the Therapeutic Astrology podcast. But today I'm visited. I'm so honored to be with a podcast colleague of mine, Astrology Alchemy podcast. You're the host, Sheila Bélanger. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mana. I'm so happy to be here with you and your people.
Yeah, and you have this subtitle to your podcast where you say attune with the cosmos to spark your evolutionary journey.
Yes.
Really like that. So I would love to hear your background because obviously anyone can press record, and be a podcast host. So it's not the greatest title of all. But I do wanna say that it's a really good podcast. It's a very you can get a lot out of it, whether you're learning astrology or not, because you have some really wonderful observations around what's happening in the collective energy. So, but apart from that, who are you? What are
Yeah.
your titles? What are you doing in the world?
Yes, thank you so much. So it's good to acknowledge lineage and where we came from. So a couple of threads, and this will come up in our conversation, I think, today. So I've been an astrologer and really an archetypal astrologer for 40 years. I started studying in the mid 80s. I was just trying to think of some of my early teachers. Buzz Myers, a wonderful, outrageous character. I mean, he's passed on a long time ago. But I'll tell you my origin story, which I think is part of this, is I was just out of college and I had been doing a double major in the United States of mechanical engineering and comparative literature. So that says a little bit about my psyche. And I was just out of college, and I didn't want to become an engineer because at the time in the United States, it was such a misogynist and patriarchal experience. It was almost like, okay, I proved to myself I could do the math, but I really don't want to work as an engineer. And the summer after my graduation from university, I happened to get an astrology reading with a practitioner, and I came in sort of with my engineer, what is this stuff, right? And like most people, I got blown out of the water by how profoundly accurate and helpful her consultation was. And so
How,
I thought,
how old
yeah,
were you?
oh, let me see. I was probably 24.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Jupiter return. Okay. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to study astrology. How'd she do that? Well, intense 2 years of study, I came out a professional astrologer. I mean, it was just one of those journeys. So I have that experience of 40 years as a practicing astrologer. I also got a master's degree in transpersonal psychology because I was having a lot of psychic phenomena happening to me, sort of spontaneous. I now know shamanic experiences, but I had no context for it. So I thought, well, I'll go and get a master's degree and figure out what's going on. That helped a lot because there was many things in transpersonal psychology that anchored me. And I also started studying neo-shamanism to become a shamanic practitioner. And my lineage is with the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, which is an organization in the States that I really respect because, for the most part, they're taking what they call core shamanism. I know you've had shamanic people,
Mhm.
guests on, where we're trying to help clients and patients without appropriating indigenous and specific tribal ways. Now, granted, it was created by a white male anthropologist, so there's some challenges with it, but fortunately, I was trained mostly by women, particularly Sandra Ingerman, so I feel like I really got some good training. So I had 25 years as a practicing neo-shamanic healer, and so I worked actively with the spirits as helping spirits to help my clients. So that's partly why I braid shamanism and astrology, because that background really helped me to understand that the planetary archetypes are spirits, they're spirit helpers, and that we can work with them on that level for healing. And then the third braid that's really important for me is depth psychology, which mainly has come through my training in what's called process-oriented psychology or process work. I know you've also had a guest on your show with that. So my work at this point in my life is not really focused on practicing astrology. I'm a transformation coach. I'm an accredited coach, and I work with leaders of all kinds, really work with those at the edge. I want to empower the change agents to do deep systemic work. And it might be a formal executive in an organization. It might be, someone on their personal journey. So that's a lot, but just to kind of tell you my background and what I braid together in the work I do in the world.
Wonderful. I want to have all that expanded as much as we have time for. I want to dive into that. Whoa. Yeah, that's a lot. And I was just thinking here for the last piece, you were saying that you are Capricorn, is your sun.
Yes, Capricorn sun sign. Yes.
Yeah. So taking it to the top and letting, that have that systemic kind of thinking that, people on top, then that's gonna spread out to the rest of us. I mean, that's what I kind of thought of when we were talking about
Yeah.
that. Okay, so these are the three things that you integrate: astrology, depth psychology, and neo shamanism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what a life! Have you been able to do that? I mean, you share the story like you graduated, and then you did something completely else. Then you started with astrology. Um, I don't even know if I want that to be my question. I'm not ready yet. I haven't chosen the right question yet.
It'll come.
Yeah, I guess it's just what I'm sitting with, like, what a life that you really, I mean, that's so inspiring and something that I long for myself to dive so much into it, that it's also where I make my living, right?
Yes, yes.
And yeah, okay, maybe start there, then I'll find another question for you.
Okay, so do you want to be specific with a question?
No, just comment on, like, how did you do that? Because people were expecting something different of you. You were probably expecting something different from you, right?
Exactly. Well, like most of us, acculturated in Western dominator colonizing society, no blame, but part of that is survival instinct, which is true. Most of us have to make a living in some way to have food and shelter and take care of our families. But particularly in the United States and in family lineage, because I also have done a lot of work with ancestral trauma healing. And so there's, for many of us in our family systems, we have unmetabolized trauma of scarcity. And so that it often informs so much of our decisions. And so I had to wrestle even in my 20s with, my blue collar family I was born in Canada. I'm French Canadian. That's what my last name is Bélanger, because it's French Canadian. But we immigrated to the States when I was quite young. And so there's that pressure, and maybe it's the same in Europe, Mana, of like, okay, get a job, get a good paying job, make sure you can take care of yourself. So I had that tension, but fortunately, because of many things in my life, even my 20s, I realized that I was an edge creature, that I really couldn't do mainstream very well. I mean, I can do it well with my Capricorn energy, and I have in my astrology chart, I have Saturn rising. So, I can pass. And I'm very practical and grounded, but guess what? I am incredibly out there and mystical. Recently I was working with getting ready for my advanced coaching certification, and one of my cohort was interviewing me and coaching me. She said, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "I'm a coach. I'm a witch shaman. That's who I am." Okay. So it was like, well, yeah, that's the truth, but it's like, okay, how are you going to express it in the world? How are you going to make a living, if you will? And I would say for any of your audience that is wrestling with that, particularly because of where we are now with so many of the transits, the amazing transformational transits. I know you've probably had people on talking about the huge changes astrologically in this decade. It's like, be as radically authentic as you can.
Oh.
And I want to give you a quote that I used actually in the late 80s when I was really going for it as a professional astrologer. It's from a journalist in the United States named Hunter S. Thompson. And his quote is, "When the going gets weird, the weird turn pro."
Ah, that's good. That's good. That's almost like Chiron in a way, that
Hmm.
like going from the handicap to the gifter, the master.
The healer, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. You are saying so many things that I want to have expanded. So, okay, the first thing was you were talking about how all the planets are. Yeah. How do you see it? Maybe you should give more words to that. Um. So it's like, did you say something around spirits?
Yes, and I'm actually going to give you a quote because I think I talked about it. I have an online course called The Shaman Sky, which basically is this material, which is looking at each of the planets, including Chiron, as an archetype to shamanic consciousness, if a person is so inclined. And I want to give you a quote. It's in my course, but I was just looking it up because it's such a good one. And it comes from, it's an article in Medium, and it's the name of it, I'll say it slowly in case your people want to find it. A Living Cosmos, Principles of Archetypal Shamanic Astrology. And here's a short quote from this author. I am Kinaswa, I think. "By reflecting on a planetary archetype, you are effectually exploring a highly developed element of the collective unconscious in a context relative to your soul's evolutionary path." So I think that quote is really helpful. And I also forgot to say, in my training as an astrologer, I also trained with Jeffrey Wolf Green with evolutionary astrology. So that fit, and I also have training as an initiation guide with soulcraft work, and I've guided ceremonial contemporary vision fasts for years in the wilderness. So I work a lot with initiation through all these different lenses. So back to your question, Mana, you can consider that the archetypal planetary beings are really allies. It's a way, your chart is an expression of unique collective unconscious archetypes. I mean, many astrologers see that. But my lens is, if we envision the planetary allies as helping spirits from a shamanic point of view, we can do guided journeys to them, whether it's in imagery work or it's prayer and ceremony, or it's with a drumming journey, a classic shamanic journey with a drum, to connect with them as shamanic allies, to help us in our own healing work, to help us open to the more archetypal collective energies and be in relationship with that archetypal level for personal and collective healing.
Wonderful. I want more specifics. Like, how would it be? How would it work? Is it okay? I have my chart, and then
Hmm.
I want to connect to this certain part of me. For example, I want to, let's say, I don't want to get so emotional, so I'll go to my Saturn that you mentioned before, and then could I work with it like that, and then connect to that energy?
You could, and it's really each person can decide. But for example, what you're just saying, I might do a journey to the moon, right? I think of her, and I think of them as gender assigned. I respect people that are not
Yeah, yeah,
binary. Is just, there's such an ancient feminine energy to the moon. So I mean it. I'm saying it in that context.
yeah.
But I see the moon as the instinctive nurturer, as an archetype. There's many ways to look at that. So if I was struggling with something emotionally, I would set an intention to journey or connect with the moon as an archetype, as an ally, to say, could you help me, please, with this particular relationship issue, or I'm getting overwhelmed by my sensitivity, and could you support me? And it would happen in whatever happens for each person, but it might be you get guidance, you might get a gift, you might get a helping animal ally, a power animal to guide you. You might be given a ceremony. I mean, there's so many ways, but to start viewing the planets in your chart as not just symbols, but living archetypal beings with whom you can create an energetic and psychic relationship as ongoing guides or support for you.
I really like that dimension of it. So what we have in common is the combination of, you call it depth psychology, I call it therapy, and astrology, because to me it just makes so much sense that we look at the person's individual chart. Even that's just a little, that's just one thing out of the whole picture here, but even that is so important, right? I want to help you, so I kind of want to just have the shortcut to see who you are.
Yes.
Do you work with it like that, or how do you see it? So do you see that the birth chart is who we are? Just give me something around how do you
Yeah.
about astrology?
Yeah. Lana, thank you so much for that question. The way I language it is, as astrologers, we often use that phrase as above, so below, as without, so within. And to me, it's astrology recognizes and affirms the ancient indigenous truth about we're all interconnected and that the planets are mirroring to us aspects of ourselves. So at the time of birth, I always tell this story to my clients when I used to work with clients is like, well, the planets were lining up to mirror to you certain characters in you and the unique evolutionary journey that you're on, so that when you look at a birth chart, it's like the evolutionary promise of this being who's come into incarnation. And of course, we know there's the chart itself, that frozen moment in time when the baby emerged. And then, of course, there's the cycles and transits, which it's a sense of where also the planets as allies are helping you they're initiating you through life.
Mhm.
And as astrologers, we know if we're looking at a transit or current cycle for somebody, we get a flavor of the particular initiation they're in, and then we also have that larger initiation cycles that are the classic cycles that happen to everyone. Every 7 years, the Saturn cycles, the classic midlife cycles of Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus that are just like completely blow up your regular consensus reality life, right? So that's how I see it, is that the planets are mirroring us, and they're also guides, they're initiation guides through life to help develop more and more of our evolutionary purpose.
Okay, let me see if I got that right. So when you say they're mirroring us, you are talking about that we're actually creating our own reality. And when you're saying that the planets are initiating us, you're not saying that we are in this kind of initiation. Like I see this chart, and that's the initiation that this person is in. So it's not who the person is.
Well, I'd say I see the planets because part of my ethics as an astrologer or a coach is person-centered. And I think actually I want to speak to this. Maybe it's not so much now, but sometimes with astrologers and astrology practitioners, we have to be so careful of the power we're given by a client. And so if we have a mindset that says you're locked in, okay, you have Saturn opposite Venus in your birth chart, you'll never have a successful relationship, right?
Mhm.
Like, or your relationships will always be hard. That kind of mindset is so limiting and so punitive in a way. So I really am drawn to, I want to accurately translate the planet in your chart, its sign, its house, its aspect, to evoke in you your sense of that one inside of you, like your inner Mars or your inner Venus or your inner Pluto. And to have your own unique relationship with that. So certainly I don't think we can avoid the fate that's sort of listed in our chart,
Okay.
but I think that's like the soul's journey of like, I came here for certain reasons. I incarnated for certain reasons. And the chart is like a navigation map. But we have to be so careful as astrologers or coaches or therapists that we don't unconsciously transmit our own limitations to our clients or patients to lock them into an identity that's too small for their soul.
Yeah, 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 for sure. an identity that's too small for the soul. Any identity, I guess, would be. Yeah. Okay. So do you see, I'm just curious how you see this. Do you see the soul in the birth chart?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I want to honor my evolutionary astrology people, you included, I think. And, where at least the version I got with Jeffrey Wolf Green was, Pluto is the soul. And I do feel I very much agree with a lot of that training, but I also feel even that is too limiting because I feel like the soul is mirrored by the whole chart.
Yeah.
And that Pluto is particularly important in terms of the capacity to allow the old identity to die so that a greater manifestation and expression of soul can come forward. But I do feel the whole chart is like a mirror of the soul's gifts and energy, and that the cycles we go through in life, particularly the key initiation cycles that we all go through at certain ages,
Yeah.
they are initiation times of like, can I live more into my soul promise? And what resources do I need, and what identities do I have to release to become even more authentic to my soul's promise?
So I want to ask you, because you have so much experience with this. I'm just taking the time to ask you about things that it confuses me, because is it the identity or is it the soul that we see in the birth chart? Or do you see like a higher version of the symbol to do with the soul and the lower versions to do with, how do you?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Thank you, Mother. What fabulous questions. They really excite me. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to have this kind of conversation with a colleague about this. Your question brings me to my other deep work, which is anti-oppression work and addressing the toxicity of patriarchal colonization, white supremacy in the United States, but a sort of archetypal mindset of domination. So we are born with our chart and the configuration of the planets in the heavens, and of course we're enculturated. So, someone who has, as an example, if you were born with Mars in Aries and you incarnated into a really conservative part of the United States, your Mars might be trained up to get a gun, and to dominate, no matter what your gender is. So there's the promise, and then how are you acculturated? How are you imprinted with your culture, your family of origin, your culture of origin? So there's nuances, is like the chart as a soul map, but then how are you enculturated, and how do you grow through that enculturation and grow out of it? So it's kind of a nature nurture question a little bit.
I see. Yeah, I like it. I'm getting the image like being rinsed off of the societal programs, and then there's maybe the true soul.
Well, yes, and I say, coming back to, for the longest time in my astrology career, I really focused on midlife cycles, because you know how the mystery brings you certain kinds of clients. And so I just had a whole slew of midlife women from like mid-30s to really mid-50s, and so the planets train you right by your clients. And I kept noticing, particularly the years between the mid-30s to the mid-40s were so productive, archetypal support from the planets, the cycles, to break free of the limited enculturated identity. And I'm speaking particularly to the three big transpersonal planets. So the in the era that I worked, the Uranus opposition usually happened around age 39 to 40. The Neptune square Neptune for everybody is age 41 to 42. And the Pluto square Pluto for the generations I was working with were in the late 30s. It's a little bit later now, depending on the journey. But those three, it's like if a client had the resources and capacity, they could lean in, because Uranus blows up the too small restrictive identities. Neptune dissolves and takes us and not doing anything to us, but it invites this kind of oceanic, dissolving, questioning, and opening up our psychic and spiritual sides and our altered state sides. And Pluto, of course, takes us into the underworld of addressing our shadow material and the not me part of ourselves, but again, one of the things I've found is to grow out of the enculturated too small role, we also need the resources. And most of us have unmetabolized ancestral and personal trauma. So that's where, very gifted therapists or healers can resource the person in these initiation times to say, what do I need internally to actually give myself fully to this initiation cycle and grow? Because no doubt you've seen, and many of your audience have seen, people abort their initiation cycle because they don't have the inner resources, or they're still so caught in the pain and suffering of the unmetabolized trauma that there isn't the capacity to move fully into the promise of the initiation cycle of the particular transit cycle that they're in at the time.
Mm. Oh, I really like that. The promise of it. Like, this is the potential. This is where you could go.
Right.
And so you mentioned generational trauma, that you've been working with that a lot.
Yes.
What is your experience in the birth chart? I mean, that would be fun if you could say something like, this is where it is in the birth chart. Can you?
Oh, that's so great. I can't say it, but I highly recommend, if you have discovered or your audience has discovered astrobutterfly.com. It's a group of astrologists, think out of the US. They do a wonderful blog. They have a course, an online course called Transgenerational Astrology. And in it, if you can, you find the charts for as many of your ancestors, and you start tracking common astrological patterns. And they have particularly questions and reflections that might indicate some sort of generational pain or wound. They do use Chiron. I use Chiron. I'm so grateful. I was trained with Chiron from the get-go. So it's always been, and of course, to me, it's the wounded healer, it's the shamanic one. So it's been a key character, and it's really key in my chart. So I was like, of course I would be following the path I'm following. But I want to say that's one resource. And for me, I don't know that there's a specific patterning, but I particularly, if I'm trying to support someone with generational trauma, of course, I'm going to look at Saturn and the moon, but also the nodes are so important, because that perspective of what's the karmic, this is how I see it. I have a very deep belief in reincarnation. So I just want to say that, because that may not be so for all your audience. So I want to just, contextualize my response, is that you could look at the notes, you could look at so many things, but also the story, the actual interviewing of the client. If you're working as an astrologer, what are the strong themes that, as you investigate, are generational? And as I alluded to in the beginning, I really could identify scarcity, and that's a very common generational trauma, because there's been so much pain and suffering. So, there might be some strong themes that you work with your astrology client and say, okay, this keeps challenging you. Might it also have a connection with unresolved ancestral trauma? And at that point, there's many resources like trauma therapists you could refer a client to. And I believe Europe knows about this, the systemic family constellation work, which is profound when it's facilitated well, of ways that you can work in a group or one-on-one to enact a family trauma that could be resolved or could be opened up. But I don't think you can see it. It's not formulaic. I didn't hear you asking for formula, but I see it as it's really nuanced depending on the client.
Yeah. It was just fun if you had one place. Just looking. Always.
Well, I will. Actually, now I'll answer that question.
Okay, great.
Chiron to
Yeah.
me, the way I hold Chiron is, and I want to honor Melanie Reinhardt, especially, brilliant work on Chiron. There's so many people doing brilliant work on Chiron, but she was very seminal for me when I started really investigating Chiron. And also, oh, I probably can look at the book here. Hang on a sec. Barbara Hand Clow. She did some early work on Chiron that was very helpful. And so for me, Chiron as an archetype holds 3 levels. It's personal wound and healing. So whatever your core wound is, the Chiron signature in the chart can help you understand that. But it's also like classic wounded healer shamanic being, where the wound, your work with the wound accesses your own medicine.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm going to use myself as an example because it goes to the question you asked much earlier. So my natal Chiron is in Aquarius. And for me, that symbolizes the wound of self-marginalization. I'm too weird, I'm too different, I don't fit in. And that sense of being out, you know, not
And
fitting, being other.
you're saying self
Self, yeah,
marginalization.
but also marginalization by the world, right? So I had my own journey, like we all do, of suffering with that. But the more I kept being my quirky self and like becoming an astrologer, the pay scale for astrologers is not the same as engineers. I'm just
Yeah,
saying, okay.
I realized
So
that.
I had to follow my own quirky Aquarius. But of course, through my own lots and lots of healing, now my medicine with Chiron and Aquarius is I help others, sacred others, embrace their weirdness, their quirkiness, their unusualness. I call it being the sacred other, you know. So that's like a personal thread of Chiron. And then there's the ancestral. I feel like you can use Chiron to investigate ancestral pain. And I find Chiron also, it's all the places in the chart, you know, it's sign, house, and aspects. How is this a larger ancestral wound story? And so it's a way you could, as you do your own personal work to heal, you could say, where has this also shown up in my family system? And what kinds of resources might I bring to address that? Talking to the ancestors, constellation work, ceremony, prayer, all kinds of things. And then the third level of Chiron to me is our own unconscious places we wound others. So it's kind of the shadow aspect of Chiron. And that's partly what can happen in personal healing. Again, I'll use mine. So Chiron and Aquarius, I find some of my personal shadow has been I disappear. I'm out of here. I'm that classic Aquarius. It's getting too intimate. It's getting too crazy.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
I'm feeling too trapped. I'm gone. Okay,
Do I know this guy?
unconsciously. Okay,
Do I
yeah.
know this guy? Oh,
Okay, unconsciously escaping because I'm in pain, but not realizing how much pain I'm causing because I basically ghosted my people. Right? I checked out. I hope that's helpful, Mana, to use
it's
this as an
very
example.
helpful. I like those 3 levels. See if I can say them back to you. It's like the personal wound, was that the first one? And then that's also the medicine.
Yeah, that you grow into it. You know, the wound is the medicine is in the wound. It's very
Mhm.
shamanic, a wounded healer. Yeah.
And then where you've been, well, that was the example with Aquarius, that you've been othered and marginalized. But what would you call that middle one, wherever you've been?
The ancestral healing line. Where is this wound signature greater than my personal journey? Where is it an ancestral pattern? And also the wonderful work. I want to say Thomas Hubel. If your audience has probably met him, you know, there's many people doing wonderful trauma work. I really like Thomas's work. It's very integrous.
Yeah. Yeah, there is wonderful trauma work. I'm so glad about that. And like I wrote you in an email, I feel like that the trauma work is so connected to what we're doing. It's another way of saying which. I mean there are different trauma specialists, and a lot of them in established positions would not be that what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about the newer waves of, for example, Thomas Rubel, but many others, and Gabor Mate, some of the ones
Yes.
we know and who've shared their works. That's it seems to be more mystical than
Yes.
than than what it appears to me.
Yes. And I want to say, just to follow up, because I can get going. I mean, I have Mercury in Sagittarius rising, so you have to sort of stop me.
I'm just here to listen to you. Please go.
But you said, okay, so just to recap, from my perspective, again, my filter, Chiron, 3 key threads:
Yes.
personal wound work to access your healing medicine.
Mhm.
Number 2, ancestral wound patterns, and how there can be, you do your healing work, you also can help the ancestors with their healing. And thirdly, your unconscious places where you unconsciously wound others.
Genius. I like that. Where you unconsciously wound others. Yeah. So we have to think about that. All the listeners, if you know your placements, that's a good one to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. And with the caveat, because again, I'm aware of your therapeutic background, there's no shoulding or shaming. That the nature of the Chiron archetype to me, and this is very shamanic, it's that there's a karma of a certain kind of wound that as you grow into it and heal it, your intimacy with that is what allows the healing to come through you. So the third level, if I am unconsciously wounding others, that's painful for everyone, but it's one of the ways I learn. And I recognize intimately where the wound can become the medicine, because I grow and get conscious and say, oh, I'm not going to wound others like that anymore. And I'm sensitive where someone else might have that pain. So I can help them better because I'm very intimate from the inside of what that healing journey is like. Mana, I always do this. I take a moment to the technical gremlins to say, I bow to you. I send you love. Thank you for helping us.
Very shamanistic, right? Yeah.
Very, because,
Yeah.
well, and also, Mana, the process work, process-oriented psychology, I love it because it's very a systemic field conscious. So basically, one of the premises of process work is whatever happens in the field needs to be happening. So how do we engage with it with consciousness and awareness? So even technical things, I can get irritated, but I often realize, okay, the technical gremlins are here. Let me acknowledge you. You're in the field. May you have what you need. Please don't mess with my internet connection.
You have to tell us more about process work now that you why is that a good match to astrology?
Oh my
Because,
gosh.
for example, one method that model I'm using is IFS, Internal Family Systems, and that's because it's a perfect match to astrology from my
Yes.
all these parts. So I wonder how with the models that you're working with, I'm sure it's
Yeah.
because it's also matching your foundation, right?
Right. Thank you. Yeah. And by the way, thank you. I agree. I think the IFS with astrology is mwah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So lovely. So process work. How can I? Okay. One way that I explain process work to people is the founder, the one through whom it came, a man named Arnie Mindell, who's recently in the spirit world. Arnie, bless you. He had training as both a quantum physicist and a depth psychologist, a Jungian depth psychologist. So process work is like a marriage between quantum physics and depth psychology. It's like really trippy. And essentially it says that, I'll say it very simply, one of the main gifts from process work is to consider 3 levels of awareness. And again, it's just a map, but it may be helpful. The first level is consensus reality. We call it CR for short, but essentially it's everyday, it's middle world in shamanic consciousness. It's everyday life, it's holy and sacred, but it has to do with the conscious mind, the everyday ego mind. Totally fine. Underneath consensus reality, they call it dreamland. And this is the archetypal mythic realm. And this is where the shapeshifting goes on, where as a consciousness, as a human, we can shapeshift into different roles. It's very shamanic. So it's like the dream that's always happening underneath everyday reality. And then the third layer of awareness they call the essence level or the non-dual. And there's many names for that from different faith traditions, but it's the essence, it's the oneness, whatever you, God, Goddess, Buddha, nature, allness, Allah, all of it. And with process work, a lot of the practices, and there's also therapy, you can get trained to do process work therapy. What you're attempting to do is help the individual open their awareness underneath consensus reality and tap the dream, the dreamland, the mythic, the archetypal, and stay connected to essence level. And it's not a particular religious or faith tradition, it's a human experience. And where it matches to me with astrology is my work with the planets as archetypal allies, because they're in the dreamland for me. So I'm in consensus reality. We're all living right now when we're recording this interview with Mars retrograde in Cancer. That's a cycle for your audience. You know, you have astrologers as well as non-astrologers. It's a difficult cycle because what often happens is we're getting in touch with our irritation and our rage and our also where our vitality, we've lost our energy. So we can be in consensus reality pissed off. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't say that in the recording, but you know, irritated, agitated, angry, and we just get caught in a tizzy. Process work would say, well, what's happening in your body with anger? What if you moved that anger and you tapped into it as an energy or as a being? Not to get taken over by it and cause harm, but to be curious, what's the dream underneath your ordinary mind's anger? And what's really like it opens up our mental conscious self to a bigger dreaming that's happening.
What is the dream beneath your conscious anger?
Right, right.
What is the dream beneath it? What could the dream beneath it be?
Right. I mean, this is something also therapeutically. You might ask, what are you really angry about?
Right.
You know, because there's habitual ego reaction. But it's like, okay, what if you went into, and process work does a lot of embodiment work safely. You want to do this if you feel okay going into your body, because sometimes people recovering from trauma, it's not safe, as you know, to be in the body. But you might say, okay, if I was going to move my body a bit to express the anger, not with my mind, but just be curious. What is the energy? Do I get any imagery? Are there any sounds? And what often happens when you activate a consensus reality pattern, which is often small and limited and habitual, you open to the dream of it, it often shifts things. And it's not like a magical, okay, I'm not angry anymore. It's often you get a felt sense or you get a deeper insight. Oh, this is really the root of the anger. And then you have more capacity to work with it rather than feel hostage to the constant habitual irritation, anger, exhaustion. Is that a helpful example, Lana?
I feel like that's even answering a question a while ago where I was asking about what planet to go to get out of maybe when an emotion has hijacked you, right? When
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
this emotion and it's going through you, but when it's taking over the system.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, as an example, I think I would go here. I'm going to check with you, but you know, you can respectfully look at the planets like parts. You know, there's I mean, I was listening to one of your other wonderful interview you did with, oh, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name. She also talked about shamanism and astrology, a Mexican practitioner.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah,
bless her. Yeah.
but
Anyway, but you can really see the planets. There's a spectrum. There's unhealthy expression and there's healthy expression, right? Or wounded or empowered expression. So just as a sort of diagnostic map, you can say what are some key challenges that can happen in the human psyche and which planetary ally or archetype would be most there. So anger or exhaustion could be a Mars energy, right? The inner critic being up, that is Saturn, right? That's unhealthy Saturn. Anytime you've got a punitive shooter in your head, that's more than likely unconscious Saturn, right? Wounded Saturn. If you've got, I know this one really well because I have Jupiter really prominent in my chart. The dogmatic, I know everything, let me tell you the truth with a capital T. Diagnostically, go look at your Jupiter. It's a good chance that character, you know, and so forth. So it's not to limit, but it's like a diagnostic tool. I'm wrestling with something. I'm taken over by an experience. Does it resonate with one of the key planetary archetypes? Might I go on a journey to that planetary ally? Can you help me with my anger? Can you help me with my arrogance and my dogma? Can you help me with my overwhelmed emotionality? Again, I'm saying this, and I want to keep empowering that there's a fullness and it doesn't get just cookie cutter.
No, it sounds really alive, finding that
Yeah.
And diving into yourself, inside yourself. Okay, so I'm aware of our time, and I would love if you would talk a little bit more about what you mentioned in terms of the time that we are in.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
you on your podcast. If a week per week, you go through the transits. So,
yes.
And that's a great place to go. I want to say that for sure. I want to emphasize that to find out what is going on currently, because I do that sometimes if there's something major, but it's not consistently. But you can have that on Astrology Alchemy podcast.
Yes.
But so here, just I would love your thoughts around what's coming up and what are we in already and what are we looking.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And there's so many good astrology sources and astrologers speaking to that. Gosh, where do I start? Well, one of the things that's a challenge for me, I want to say this because I do a weekly forecast with my Astrology Alchemy podcast, but then I'm looking in the sort of what's happening this week. And so you give me the question, I get to lens back and say, here's the context, right? So leading with Pluto going into Aquarius and the rarity of that cycle for the next 20 years. And so that's one big piece, which is this archetype of evolutionary transformation, Pluto, that is now in the sign of the people and egalitarian energy. So and also just as a sidebar, because I live in the United States. I'm on the edge. I'm on the west coast, the upper northwest coast of the United States. I'm an edge figure living at the edge is best. I'm actually on an island. So, and this is the sidebar. I won't say too much, but of course, the United States has just finishing up its Pluto return, which is extremely rare. Pluto came back to its natal position in the United States chart, which is in Capricorn. So really everything we're seeing in the United States, as horrific it is, this is a Pluto cycle, okay? Because Pluto says what's in the basement that has to be looked at, and you're not going to escape it. So what we're all living through right now with this current administration, I can't call this person a president because he is not acting like one in any way whatsoever. But this is our Pluto material, right? But this is also global. This is not just the United States, because we're seeing in so many countries the resurgence of patriarchal dominator, conservative, angry and violent energies. Okay. Pluto in Aquarius is saying, here's the shadow of Capricorn. And we are moving into a new era, but we have to metabolize the shadow. And then there's also the theory, which I'm with, is not only is it Pluto turning into Aquarius, but the end of the cycle, the Pisces cycle, and moving into the Aquarian age. These are the 2000-year eras. So we're at this tumultuous place of so many shifts of era and consciousness. And Pluto in Aquarius is one way of looking at it. But then this year, Neptune, one of the transpersonal planets, goes into Aries with Saturn. They begin to partner each other for a year. Uranus, the transpersonal planet of the maverick, the change bringer, goes in to Gemini. So we have these huge shifts, and many astrologers talk about it elementally, where we've got planets that have been in water and earth elements moving in to air and fire. And that's also a huge shift elementally and archetypally. So there's this big consciousness shift. Plus we can throw in Mars retrograde, Mars retrograde in Cancer, Venus retrograde in Aries, Pisces in this like 6-8 month period starting last year. So the takeaway is the tumultuous change of era and the necessity for the old to die, for the new to be reborn, and the hospicing of, some people call it the hospice work of modernity. I'd say it's the hospice work of patriarchy. And, you know, we have a patient who doesn't know they're dying.
Yeah.
And so then you have all the difficulties of that in our own self. I'm not pointing fingers, because what's happening in the US, this is our own shadow as a country. It's just
Yeah.
getting played out by these actors, which is horrific and so dangerous and so violent. But hello, shadow work, this has always been in the United States' soul since its incarnation. So we get to look at it, and all of us get to look at these tumultuous changes, and we can point fingers and say, the politicians are doing it, that's doing that. It's our own collective and personal shifting, evolutionary shift, and it's not easy. And tools like everything we've been talking about, astrology, therapy, all kinds of spiritual practices, all kinds of activist practices, to try to collectively make that great turning that Joanna Macy talks about. Okay, I'm going to stop here, Monica, because you pressed
Oh, I
the
love
sad,
it.
you pressed the sad button.
I'm
Okay,
so
and we
glad.
have to stop very soon.
I'm so glad. Yeah, we have a big match on Sagittarian energy. I love that.
Okay.
Just a final question. So, what do you think that it means this year that the planets are just, the ones you mentioned, are just moving in and then out again
Yeah.
in 25, and then in 26 they're gonna stay for longer? But what do you think? What does this entail for 25?
Yeah, I would use a phrase that I use with edge work, which I specialize in. The ancient called it betwixt and between place. You're no longer what you were. You don't yet know who you're becoming. And that liminal place of transition between the old and the new identities is so rich and fertile and so terrifying. So all of us need to get resourced so that we can bear this liminal transition from the old to the new. And that means deep inner healing work. That means collectively being together, activating more of your psychic and spiritual resources. So many things. But it's how do we be in that betwixt and between at the edges? Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love the edge. I feel it's a Scorpio word, right?
It is very Scorpio. And that is, by the way, my main website, if I can say that for folks.
Yes, say it.
It's ontheedgesofchange.com. And there's all kinds of free resources. I've got some small digital courses with different astrological life cycles you can go get. And just to get some resources for you to be at the edge and be honored and supported.
And be okay on the edge. Someone is walking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sheila.
Oh, Mana.
Uh,
I am so honored and grateful to be with you and your people. Thank you all. And one of the other parts of my life is I'm a practicing Tibetan Buddhist. And one of our traditions is we offer up the blessings of whatever we've been doing to benefit all beings. So if that'd be okay with you, as we finish, if I make that blessing, that the two of us, all that's happened here, all the spirits, all the energy, particularly the audience that's with us, may all be blessed. May all beings be blessed and liberated from suffering by being with us in this conversation.
Beautiful. I'm so glad that I found you. I feel like you have so much treasure. It's that all of that Capricornian experience, and you've just gathered throughout the years. So I'm so happy to get just pieces of that here. Thank you, and I hope to meet you again.
Thank you so much, and great blessings to you and all your people. Thank you, dear one.
Thank you.